If I had control, you wouldn't be working in a freaking strip club. You do whatever you want with whoever you want. I don't know who you're with or what time you're out till 4, 5, 6 in the
You're
morning.
accusing me of doing stuff that I'm not doing. I don't appreciate it. If that's what you believe, I seriously can't be in this relationship.
I don't want to lose you,
I'd rather, be by myself.
After I proposed to her and gave her the commitment, I thought she'd be like, hey, this place isn't so bad at all. We can make this work. But she wants...
He said it on camera, in front of millions, with no hesitation and no pause, suggesting the woman he planned to marry slept with clients for money. And once those words landed, there was no pulling them back, no editing trick, no reunion couch apology strong enough to erase the damage.
We just cannot keep doing this.
I love this crazy, beautiful love.
It is crazy.
I wouldn't trade it for the world.
That single moment should have ended everything. Because when respect dies publicly, love usually follows right behind. Yet, this story refuses to behave the way logic expects. How does a relationship survive a sentence like that? Not after a month or a year, but after 12 long years of shared history, shared fights, shared makeup cycles, and shared excuses. Welcome back to TLC Drama Live. I am Sabrina, and if this channel ever feels uncomfortable, it is because relationships like this are uncomfortable when you stop romanticizing them. So subscribe and tell me in the comments what crossed the line for you here, because this is one of those moments where silence says more than shouting. This is not about rumors or jealousy or even strip club politics. This is about what happens when someone chooses humiliation as a weapon and the other person chooses to stay standing in the blast zone, telling herself there must be a reason. The question worth asking is not whether the accusation was fair, because on screen nothing supported it, and Pat denied it immediately with shock written all over her face. The real question sits deeper and hurts more. Why would Dylan say something like that out loud? On television, knowing there is no undo button, knowing the internet never forgets, knowing Pat would carry those words long after the cameras shut off. People do not drop nuclear lines by accident. They do it to seize control of the room, to flip the power dynamic, to put the other person on defense. And when you say something so extreme that the other person starts explaining their innocence instead of questioning your behavior, the balance shifts fast. What makes this harder to watch is Pat's reaction, because she does not fire back with equal cruelty. She does not counterattack his character. She breaks down. And that tells you everything about where this relationship already was before the cameras rolled. Crying is not weakness here. It is shock. It is grief. It is the sound of someone realizing the person beside them is willing to sacrifice their dignity to win an argument. And still, she does not walk away clean. Not then, not later. And that is where this story stops being gossip and starts being uncomfortable truth. Why say it publicly when a private conversation would have been painful enough? Why aim for the one accusation that stains reputations forever? Why frame control as concern and suspicion as love? And the biggest question of all, why does Pat not leave when the line is crossed in permanent ink? People love to shout leave from the couch, but 12 years builds habits, routines, identities, and a quiet fear that walking away means admitting all that time did not protect you from being disrespected anyway. Here is a detail that changes the entire weight of this moment, because after that accusation, after the tears, after the shock, these two are not broken up, not cooling off, not done. They are engaged again, planning a future together, smiling through unresolved damage, and once you know that, every word he said and every tear she shed feels heavier, because this was not the end. It was the warning shot. 12 years is not a number you hear casually. It is a lifetime measured in arguments, reconciliations, vacations, nights spent holding on to hope, and mornings spent questioning choices. And when you spend that long with someone, the usual rules of logic start to bend because emotional. Investment becomes a kind of currency you are reluctant to spend even when the balance is clearly against you. These two are not strangers flinging accusations in the heat of the moment. They are people who have built a shared history, a private language, and a pattern of forgiveness that has trained both of them to accept chaos as the norm. To argue, break, and come back together over and over until the shock of betrayal becomes slightly less shocking, and the expectation of disappointment becomes normal. Welcome back to TLC Drama Live. I'm Sabrina, and if you've ever wondered why people stay in relationships that make viewers scream at their screens, hit subscribe and drop a comment, because what we are about to unpack is not entertainment, it is emotional gravity. Their history is layered with moments that outsiders never see. From first arguments that escalated into life lessons, to milestones that were quietly celebrated between the two of them without anyone else knowing. And every time they left each other only to return, the emotional cost of walking away grew heavier, while the pull of familiarity, of knowing exactly how the other thinks and reacts, became almost impossible to resist. That's how long-term relationships rewrite logic. When you have endured heartbreak together, endured misunderstandings, endured the cycle of apology and repair, your brain starts to treat the pattern itself as safety, even when the actions no longer deserve trust. Over the years, their on-off pattern became a behavioral loop, a kind of training ground where forgiveness is earned through repetition rather than sincerity, and reconciliation feels like proof that the relationship is viable even when the underlying issues never truly resolve. This is how two people can normalize chaos, arguing in ways that would scare anyone else, knowing how far the other can push before the bond snaps, and still come back together as if the past week or month never existed. The stakes are higher than a stranger's spat, because both of them have invested decades, and this shared history makes the shock of public humiliation more complicated. There is pride, there is hope, there is fear, and there is an invisible chain of all the times they stayed when leaving would have been simpler. The relocation factor adds another layer, because Pat is living in Australia now, far from the familiarity of home, while Dylan's presence and patterns make her feel tethered even as she longs for freedom. And the tension of geography amplifies every disagreement, every accusation, every controlling gesture. Pat's discomfort is not born of a lack of love entirely. It is built on the frustration of feeling trapped by circumstance, of wanting to reclaim autonomy in a life she did not fully choose. And yet, the emotional weight of 12 years keeps her moving forward, negotiating freedom in small pieces, instead of walking away entirely. When the cameras catch her admitting it, the words are simple but heavy. Tasmania does not feel like home. And in that moment, the audience realizes that even when love lingers, the sense of being stranded in someone else's decisions can grow louder than hope itself. The gym should have been neutral ground, a place to focus on strength and rhythm. But in their world, it instantly became a stage for control, tension palpable in every movement. Dylan starts by correcting Pat, not with a gentle suggestion, but with the kind of tone that implies she doesn't know what she's doing, as if 12 years of experience, years of shared workouts, and knowledge of her own body mean nothing when he's standing nearby. He critiques her stance, her grip, the angle of her lift, each correction laced with impatience that disguises itself as concern, the kind of control that whispers, "I know better than you," even when the evidence suggests otherwise. Pat pushes back quietly at first, reminding him she's been at the gym since before he even considered what a warm-up looked like. And immediately the tension thickens, because what should have been a shared space for mutual effort now feels like a battlefield where every eye roll, every hesitant smile is a tactical response. This is what makes the scene so gripping and infuriating, because control often dresses itself in the language of care, in the voice of instruction, and if you didn't know better, you might think he is trying to help. But the way he tightens his corrections, the way he speaks over her, the subtle impatience that colors each word, makes the intention obvious. He is demonstrating dominance, not guidance. The irony is brutal when you remember that Dylan is a dancer himself, moving with precision and confidence in his own routines, yet when Pat wants to return to dancing professionally, he frames her ambitions as irresponsible, hypocritical, and somehow threatening, a contradiction that hangs heavy. In the air, without ever needing to be shouted. The viewer feels it immediately. The clash between his freedom and her restricted freedom. The unspoken rules he enforces in a relationship that should be mutual. Exposing a tension that resonates because it's familiar to anyone who's ever felt their autonomy questioned under the guise of care. The escalation is subtle at first, in the tightening of his voice, in the sharpness of his gestures, in the way he positions himself between her and the space she owns, and then it grows, layering criticism with expectation, pushing Pat into a corner where her patience and composure are tested. Simultaneously, she responds not with equal aggression, but with measured defiance, a combination of frustration, disbelief, and self-preservation that only seems to fuel his insistence, as though resistance itself justifies tighter control. Every rep, every correction, every tiny exchange is loaded with unspoken stakes, and by the end of the session, instead of stepping back, taking a breath, or acknowledging her expertise, Dylan doubles down, escalation replacing empathy, leaving the gym not as a neutral zone of training, but as a battlefield where control, pride, and resentment have taken center stage, and Pat is left navigating a terrain where even her strength cannot make the space safe. When Dylan drops the accusation, it lands like a hammer. He doesn't whisper, he doesn't lean in privately, he broadcasts it on television, implying that Pat is meeting clients after work, twisting something that could have been a concern into a public judgment that stains her character. This isn't jealousy. It isn't a fleeting moment of insecurity or worry. It's character assassination disguised as curiosity, a calculated way to assert power while making her look guilty, helpless, and exposed in front of millions who are watching every twitch, every reaction, every flicker of disbelief cross her face. The shock is immediate. Pat doesn't fire back with anger. She doesn't even raise her voice at first. Her body tightens, her eyes widen, and disbelief sets in like a cold weight pressing down because words spoken publicly carry permanence that private arguments never can. And she is forced to process humiliation while cameras and viewers silently catalog every microexpression as evidence. Public accusations hit differently than private fights because there is no safe space to digest them. In private, arguments end when the door closes, when the night passes, when you walk away from the conversation. But when the accusation is out in the world, it enters a space where every friend, family member, and social media stranger becomes a witness, a jury, and potentially a participant in. The judgment. The power dynamic shifts immediately. Dylan, knowingly or unknowingly, frames himself as the arbiter of truth, the one holding the narrative, while Pat is reduced to defending herself against a story she did not create. And that power imbalance is heavier than any argument over a missed gym session or a forgotten chore because it threatens identity itself. Pat's reaction evolves in real time. First disbelief, then creeping horror at how her life and choices are being twisted in front of an audience that cannot see the nuance of 12 years of shared history. All the sacrifices, the compromises, the laughter and tears condensed into a single accusation that paints her as something she is not. The emotional weight is almost unbearable because there is no escape, no corner to shrink into where she can reclaim dignity privately. Every word Dylan spoke becomes a tiny anchor, weighing down her confidence, her trust, and her sense of self. And even though she knows the truth alone cannot undo the spectacle of humiliation already inflicted. Finally, she breaks. Tears come not from rage, but from shock, from grief, from the realization that respect, once publicly stripped, cannot simply be reclaimed. She steps away, walks toward the door, leaving the confrontation behind, not because she has forgiven, not because the power has shifted back, but because survival in that moment means creating space, drawing a line, and refusing to participate in the spectacle any longer. Her exit is quiet, measured, but devastating, the first real act of agency in the room, and it is a reminder that sometimes walking away, even briefly, is the only way to keep one's dignity intact when words are used as weapons. It's easy to watch this and think, just leave, walk out, put an end to it. But reality rarely works that cleanly, especially when you've spent more than a decade building a life with someone. When the lines between self and relationship are blurred. And when leaving means not just stepping away from a person, but stepping away from the identity, the routines, the history you've shared. Pat's choice to stay is not weakness. It's the result of an invisible gravity that pulls at anyone who has invested years of effort, emotion, and time into a partnership. Where every memory, every compromise, every shared laughter creates a web that is hard to untangle even when the threads themselves have started to fray. Attachment doesn't always show up in the dramatic, textbook way. It can be subtle, quiet, almost habitual. When you see Pat's expressions, her hesitations, the way she negotiates space rather than shutting the door completely, it's clear she is balancing fear, loyalty, and hope in a mix that doesn't make sense on paper, but makes perfect sense to someone who has spent 12 years navigating love, resentment, and dependency all at once. It's the same reason people return to on-off relationships over and over. Familiarity, even when it hurts, is easier than confronting the blank slate of starting over, facing the unknown, and redefining yourself outside a structure you've known for years. Time investment also carries its own weight. Pat knows this relationship is toxic. She admits it in quiet moments when the cameras aren't rolling, when she confides in herself or friends, when she allows herself a glimpse of what freedom might feel like. Yet, staying is almost instinctive, because walking away would mean admitting that all the time spent wasn't enough to create stability or respect, that the patterns of compromise, negotiation, and survival were insufficient shields against humiliation. It's not a failure to stay. It's the echo of history telling you that leaving is scarier than staying, even when staying feels wrong. Her words and actions are fascinating when you compare them. She can say she doesn't feel at home, that she's frustrated, that she's unhappy, and yet she remains engaged again, planning a wedding in a world where trust has been fractured publicly and privately, and where respect has been called into question repeatedly. She makes it clear she sees the toxicity, that she feels the strain, but her decision to stay reveals how layered human choices can be. Knowledge and emotion do not always align with action, and survival, hope, and the remnants of shared love carry a force that can outweigh logic. And here it lands again, heavier this time. Despite the public humiliation, despite the tears, despite the shock of the accusations and the control, these two are engaged again, committing to a future that on paper seems impossible. And that weight, the recognition of all the unresolved, unhealed, and undeniably complicated emotional history makes the announcement resonate in a way that shocks even the most seasoned viewer, leaving you staring at the screen, wondering why anyone would choose to walk back into that fire willingly. Dylan's words are always measured, almost practiced, and that's the thing that makes this part of the story so insidious. On camera, he frames himself as the calm, rational partner, the one who sees the bigger picture, the one who reacts responsibly when emotions flare. And if you didn't watch closely, you might think he's genuinely trying to manage a chaotic situation. But the closer you look, the clearer the contradiction becomes. He claims trust, he claims understanding, he claims fairness, yet every correction, every accusation, every subtle jibe undermines the very foundation of those words. Trust is supposed to be earned and given, not leveraged against someone in front of millions, and when he frames concern as criticism, and criticism as moral authority, you start to see the pattern. This is control wearing the mask of reason. Accusing Pat of behaviors she never engaged in, while simultaneously claiming he believes in her, that he trusts her, that he wants transparency, is not confusion, it is deliberate leverage. He tells himself a story of rationality and calm, but his actions, the words, the public humiliation, the repeated tightening of the space she occupies, speak a different language. It's the classic contradiction, telling someone they are free while holding the chains, reminding them of their mistakes while insisting they are loved. And the tension that creates is palpable, not because Pat doesn't see it, but because Dylan's framing is designed to keep the balance tilted just enough so she questions herself, her reactions, and even her right to speak up. Then comes the most uncomfortable question. Does Dylan actually believe his own narrative? Is he convinced that Pat is a threat to the relationship and that he's exposing a truth? Or is he fully aware of the leverage his words create, the power he wields when millions watch, and simply using it as a tool to shape her behavior? That question doesn't just hover in the background, it drives the way you see every interaction, every correction, every micro-expression, because if he truly believes it, the behavior is tragic in a deeply human way. If he doesn't, it becomes manipulative and almost strategic. A public chess game where the other person's dignity is the pawn. As viewers, we are left holding the tension ourselves, trying to decide whether we're witnessing an honest but flawed perception, or a calculated use of performance and position to maintain control. Every word he speaks, every gesture he makes, now carries two layers, the one he presents and the one that reality clearly exposes. By the time the scene ends, the question sits in the room with us. What is his intent? And does he even know the consequences of framing reality this way? Or is that ambiguity exactly what he needs to keep the upper hand? The engagement itself lands like a hammer in the middle of an already tense storm, and the timing is impossible to ignore. After months of on-off cycles, after public humiliation, accusations, and control, Dylan's proposal isn't just romance. It's a pause button, a freeze on the conflict that doesn't actually fix anything. Engagements in situations like this often act less as a celebration and more as a pressure tactic, a symbol that both raises the stakes and imposes expectations, and in this case, it feels like a way to redirect attention from unresolved issues, as if a ring can smooth over disrespect, restore trust, or erase humiliation. Symbols of commitment like weddings and proposals carry weight beyond their ceremonial meaning. They suggest security, they imply permanence, and they create social pressure to conform to the narrative of a couple in love, even when the emotional foundation is fractured. For Pat, there's a question that lingers in every glance, every hesitant smile. Was there genuine relief when the engagement happened? A fleeting sense of hope that things could stabilize? Or was there obligation? The kind born from 12 years of investment, public exposure, and fear of restarting entirely in a new place? The line between choice and compulsion blurs, and suddenly a romantic milestone carries a weight far heavier than love alone. This ties directly back to the earlier struggles with Australia and dancing. Pat has been clear about her discomfort in Tasmania, about how the relocation never felt like home, about wanting to reclaim parts of herself outside Dylan's shadow. And yet the engagement seems to implicitly demand sacrifice, a commitment to stay and invest in a life she hasn't fully chosen. The ring doesn't solve the relocation tension, it doesn't resolve the humiliation, and it doesn't untangle the control issues. It only adds a layer of formality over ongoing strain, an external expectation masquerading as progress. Marriage, in this context, isn't just a legal or emotional bond. It becomes a potential lock-in, a formalization of patterns that have already caused damage, a public declaration that may cement habits rather than heal them. The moment the engagement is announced, it forces viewers to ask what this commitment truly secures. Does it protect love, or does it protect the cycle itself? And if it's the cycle, then what exactly is being locked in when the vows are eventually said? And who will have the freedom to step back when the repetition inevitably resurfaces? Think about what you're watching for a second. This isn't just Dylan and Pat's story. It's a reflection of patterns that show up in relationships all around us. The ones we see in friends, in family, sometimes even in ourselves. I'm not here to accuse anyone, but it's hard to ignore the parallels, how small behaviors slip by at first, how repeated disrespect, control, or public shaming can slowly become normalized until the line between acceptable and unacceptable blurs almost completely. People excuse things they would never tolerate if it happened once, simply because time has worn down their outrage. Because history, shared memories, and investment create a pressure to forgive, to rationalize, to stay silent. Here's the uncomfortable question. What acts would feel unforgivable the first time, but over 10 years, somehow become tolerable? How many apologies, how many tears, how many explanations does it take before your judgment becomes relative instead of absolute? Pat stays, not because she wants to, not because she believes Dylan is right, but because 12 years have conditioned her to weigh tolerance against freedom, to calculate risk against history, to measure loyalty against self-preservation. And most of us, if we're honest, have excused behavior in our own lives that we wouldn't let pass in a stranger, just because context and history make it complicated. The truth is uncomfortable. Recognition of these patterns makes you squirm because it forces you to question not just a relationship on screen, but your own boundaries, your own definitions of respect, and the thresholds you allow for repeated offenses. Silence creeps in at the end of this realization. No quick fixes, no clean answers. The uncertainty lingers because there are no simple resolutions for behavior that has been repeated, rationalized, and normalized over years. It sits in the air, heavy and quiet, and you're left holding the questions yourself. When does tolerance become harm? And when does history become the excuse for staying in a situation you'd otherwise leave? This relationship teaches lessons that go beyond gossip or entertainment, lessons that land hard if you're willing to see them without picking a side. Both Dylan and Pat carry pain. Both have responsibility in the ways they act and react. And both are caught in a pattern that shows how easily respect can be eroded even when love exists. It's not about assigning blame for the sake of drama. It's about recognizing that words carry weight far longer than apologies ever can. A single accusation, a public humiliation, a repeated correction disguised as concern can linger, shape perception, and alter trust in ways that months of "I'm sorry" cannot erase. Love does not automatically cancel harm. It does not erase disrespect or negate control, no matter how deep the history or how strong the attachment. You can love someone and still be hurt by them. You can care for someone and still recognize patterns that are toxic. Watching Dylan and Pat, it becomes clear that the story isn't about who is right or wrong in each moment. It's about dignity, about the ongoing negotiation between self-respect and emotional investment. The lesson is that even in relationships that feel endless, even in love that has lasted a decade, boundaries and respect are not optional. And yet, the future here remains unresolved. Engagements don't guarantee resolution. Apologies don't promise repair. And history doesn't erase tension. The story ends not with a tidy conclusion, but with a question mark, a reminder that human relationships are messy, that choices carry long shadows, and that the patterns people fall into can repeat themselves even when everyone is painfully aware of them. We are left holding that tension, witnessing a cautionary tale about dignity, power, and love that refuses to fit neatly into a single narrative. And we come full circle, back to the accusation that started it all, the one that shocked millions and left Pat reeling in disbelief. 12 years of history, engagement, shared life, and yet the words still echo, still sting, still hang in the room like a warning. Some things cannot be erased by time, by apologies, or by a ring. The question lingers. Did the engagement change anything at all? Or did it simply freeze the tension, pause the argument, and allow patterns to continue under the guise of commitment? Watching them, it's impossible to feel closure. There's no sense of justice, no clear resolution, just the heavy awareness that respect was fractured publicly, privately, and maybe permanently. You see, relationships like this don't end neatly. They don't offer catharsis, they don't provide easy answers, and they don't come with guarantees that the mistakes of the past won't replay themselves tomorrow. And yet, we keep watching, compelled by the human need to understand, to question, and to recognize patterns in our own lives, even if they make us uncomfortable. That discomfort is the lesson, the reflection, the mirror that turns toward every viewer who has tolerated too much, who has stayed too long, who has questioned whether love alone is enough to keep someone from breaking you down. And while we're left uneasy with unanswered questions here, that tension doesn't fade for long. Next up, we'll follow another couple, another set of choices, another story where loyalty, control, and love collide in ways that are just as shocking but different in outcome. The dynamics shift, the stakes rise, and the lessons hit differently, proving once again that no pattern is ever the same. But the questions remain just as urgent and just as raw.